Want to dominate your market and supercharge portfolio company growth? We all know that add-on acquisitions are key. But if you get it wrong, you risk alienating your executives and destroying value. In this episode, my co-host Matt Rooney and I sit down with Bill Noonan, a seasoned private equity operator who's closed over 30 add-on acquisitions across 6 different industries. Bill pulls back the curtain on his proven framework for M&A success, including the biggest mistakes that private equity firms make with add-on acquisitions and how to avoid them.
Where I've seen people get sort of sideways with add-on acquisitions, they don't have enough rigor in setting the plan.
How to build a strategic roadmap that prioritizes the right targets and maximizes your chances of getting deals done.
You can literally instantly get something you can sell immediately, start creating value, but then focus on the integration use cases. But it has to fit.
And how to win over founders and build trust through the sourcing and execution process.
Sometimes they're not motivated by money. There are a lot of other considerations, or money is one of a subset of considerations.
Don't leave money on the table. If you're serious about mastering add-on acquisitions, this episode is for you. This is Deal Sorcery. Bill, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's so good to see you. I've been looking forward to this conversation, Bill. I know you wear a ton of hats today, right? But like for the listeners at home who might not be as familiar, can you give us that maybe 30-second elevator pitch for like your 2 current roles, I guess, at Lexipol and Manage America, and maybe just give us a sense for like what customers do you sell into and like what value prop do the businesses you're working in provide each day?
Absolutely. No, I'm incredibly proud to be leading Lexipol. It's probably one of the companies, the company with the most compelling mission that I've had a chance to lead over the course of my career. Simply put, we provide policy, training, and wellness solutions to public safety. And sort of our core target customer are mid-market public safety agencies. Think sheriff's offices, police departments, fire department. So it's just a great mission in what we do, helping support them be successful and sort of drive performance excellence in the industry. You know, I've been on board now for about 1.5 years, and I've been through the process of sort of formulating our value creation plan, our core strategy, how we're going to evolve our solutions moving forward, and doing a fair amount of what I call platforming work to sort of continue to lift the functional maturity and capability of the organization. But just super exciting business. Today, we serve about 10,000 public safety agencies and continue to grow at a decent clip. In my current Manage America board role as executive chair, I essentially serve as the mentor and coach for the existing first-time CEO. And I love these roles. And Manage America is the leading property management solution and billing solution for the manufactured housing space. So it's a very specialized vertical market. And essentially, Manage America helps enterprise customers, manage their customer relationships, bill, collect rent, and support that entire sort of resident engagement experience. So it's a great business. Pleased to be working with the CEO in that business and one of my longstanding private equity partners in Sarant Capital.
It sounds like you have a lot on your plate, but I'm curious how you got where you are today and kind of what was your journey to becoming a private equity company operator? Well,
it certainly wasn't a planned career trajectory for me. In fact, if you go back to the beginning of my career in the mid-'80s, from my perspective, what we call private equity today was still an emerging sort of model. Now it has proliferated into sort of every vertical, every industry, every direction. But I started my career as an engineer. I was in the Navy as a nuclear trained submarine officer, came back, like many folks, went to grad school, both in engineering, and then got my MBA, and then sort of fell into software companies. And over the course of my early career, had a chance to essentially punch the leadership roles for every functional team in a software company. And the way I became a private equity operator was by being in a business that was taken private. And the company is Reynolds and Reynolds. It was one of Vista Equity Partners' first big deals that they did. And it was a tremendous experience, sort of night and day, from being a public business to having a pile of private equity best practices very rapidly sort of injected in the business. It was a wild ride. It was a great experience for me while I was there through that bridging period to get my first taste. And from that point forward, this was back in 2006, Every single business that I've been part of has been private equity backed. And I've had a chance now to work with about 10 sponsors in 6 different verticals. And as Dan said early in the call, predominantly vertical SaaS companies that are going through transformations.
Was that your first exposure to private equity at Reynolds?
It was, in fact, yes. And, we were a publicly traded company, went private at the time. I was living in Europe leading Reynolds International, the international business unit. It's the head of operations, and just got to see very rapidly the implementation of a number of best practices. I think of it as Vista version sort of point one of their best practices, which has been sort of core to their operating methodology and how they drive value in their portfolio businesses.
Have you seen that? I'm curious, like, have you seen that evolve over time? Like, you're talking about how that was kind of Vista 1.0, like, you're somebody who's actually been in it and seen it like through its progression. Like, I don't know, I'm curious, just like how have you seen that change over time?
Oh, it's been a constant sort of evolution. And I think early on, there were a more narrow set of best practices. And, if you track Vista, I got to later be a Vista CEO leading Zego. The company was branded as Paylease at the time. So I got to see sort of the evolution of their model, and they became more and more thoughtful in terms of how they collaborate, sort of the breadth of best practices that they brought to the table expanded through their experience over the years. And I would say there are a lot of private equity firms that aspire to operate in a similar way, but don't have the resources. So I've seen many different models across the 10 sponsors that I work with, from sort of totally hands-off to some level of support and rigor in how they help their portfolio companies be successful.
And for folks, obviously, I think a lot of folks will understand this and know this, but perhaps for the folks that don't, that are saying like, well, what is a private equity operator, right? Like, what does that really mean? Like, how would you explain that to somebody if they're saying, oh, Bill, tell me what you do? Like, what's a private equity operator?
Very, very simply, and I'll look at it from the lens of being the CEO at this point. A private equity operator is, a professional leader that's been hired to deliver destination economics, some growth and EBITDA performance targets that demonstrate that you're creating value. Now, the challenge is you're hired to deliver those results regardless of what you face, what challenges you have to overcome, whatever the adventure might look like. That's the mission. And what's critically important is that we do that in a very thoughtful, graceful way where we take care of and develop our teams, but also, most importantly, are delivering great solutions and building sustainable businesses while we do that. So there are a lot of parallel objectives, but from the private equity sponsor perspective, it's delivering destination economics because as an operator, that's what we largely control. We can control sort of how we grow businesses, what the strategy looks like, how we optimize and make businesses more efficient and develop more investment capacity to sort of plow back into the solutions and keep that virtual cycle going. But simply put, deliver destination economics despite what challenges you face across that journey.
It's interesting, right? And maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but like, did you experience like being in the military? It feels like I see a lot of parallels there, right? Where it's kind of like, hey, we have like, here's our objective, like regardless of the adventure that you have to go through to get there, like here's what you need to go achieve.
Yeah, well, I think it certainly brought a level of discipline, operational discipline in my early development. And most importantly, though, was the opportunity to lead teams at a very early age, in my early 20s. I think ultimately, the secret sauce of driving a successful outcome for a business is building an incredibly powerful leadership team and then developing and creating opportunities for the rest of the organization. That's why people come to work every day. They're fulfilled by the mission of the company and the mission, that they serve, but also to see a career path, an opportunity to develop. And I think that's one of the interesting things about private equity as it goes through different sort of transition modes, founder to private equity, first tier to second tier. There's always an opportunity to continue to lift and mature the business. And as the CEO, I like to frame those and legitimately leverage those transition points as development platforms, for the team. And I make that sort of part of my performance management systems and how I develop folks. But the foundational sort of operational discipline and leadership came out of the Navy, the earliest days of my career.
I'm curious if you can share maybe on sort of what the day-to-day might look like. And I suppose there's a lot of variety there, and it depends on the role that you're being placed into in the company. But can you share anything there on what the day-to-day of a PE operator might look like?
Yeah. So the day-to-day of a PE operator, you got to think we're trying to jam 100 pounds into a 10-pound sack. There is no shortage of work to do. So I think what's critically important is that everybody in the organization has a very clear set of goals and priorities to achieve our objectives in destination economics achievement, to also, develop the team, deliver great products and solutions. And I think that's the biggest risk is you always have more opportunity than you have capacity to. So every day is guided by making sure that I'm putting my energy into the things that are going to drive the biggest bang for the buck. And it's a constant sort of prioritization process. There are always unknowns and issues that come up every day, but it's maintaining that North Star of what we need to accomplish this quarter. What do we need to accomplish this year, and keeping the team on track to do that? And often the toughest thing about being a CEO or a private equity operator in general is saying no to things, because in order to focus, you have to say no to things. And often that means you're delaying the implementation of a new software solution or capability. But that prioritization is incredibly important. It needs to guide every single action, on a daily basis, or how you think about evolving a business on an annual planning cycle and budgeting cycle.
You mentioned, I mean, a couple times you've mentioned this term of destination economics, right? Like I imagine it sounds like that's one of the many priorities you're juggling. But like when you think about the set of all the top priorities, right? Like what does that look like for you? Destination economics is obviously one of them. You mentioned team. Like what's it when you think about the set of priorities you focus on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis? Like what are your top ones?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, because generally when you step in as an operator, whether you're a CEO or a senior functional leader, a chief customer officer, a chief revenue officer, we pick up from a value creation thesis that's been defined by the PE firm. We need to come up with our own plan, and internalize that plan. And I'll share with you my experience in working with a number of sponsors over the course of my career. They're usually off between 25 and 50% from their sort of initial assumption set going into the deal, because they lack the vantage point of operators. And that's okay. That's normal. And like I said, our job is to achieve destination economics regardless of what challenges we face along the journey. So the first order of business is to make sure we put together an incredible strategy, an incredible plan that really guides at the highest level the focus of the team on a multi-year basis. It gets refined every year, as we sort of review the strategy on an annual cadence. But getting that framework plan in place is absolutely critical. And then from that plan down, everything cascades down. So that becomes the North Star in how you prioritize. And then, obviously things come up, every day that we have to deal with. A notification of a big customer loss, or, a system outage that we have to deal with. These are the things that you have to sort of manage through on a day-to-day basis. But you work through that in what's critically important. If you don't have that very well-defined, credible, executable plan, then you can't really keep the team aligned on a multi-year horizon to get through the cycle to do that. And there are a lot of sort of outside factors that an operator might think about, sort of the investing climate, environment, financing costs, the power that a banker might bring to the table, the value created by the scarcity of the deal that you're running. If you have a sort of a very strong market position, I don't let my teams think about any of that. We have to focus on growth and EBITDA production while making it a very positive environment, culture, sort of that where people want to come and work and learn and develop in their careers and deliver great solutions to our customers. So I try to narrow the focus to that's what destination economics is from my point of view. We set a target for growth, we set a target for EBITDA, and we try to beat it. That's just to really.
I'm sure it's a tall order oftentimes, right? Like that's yeah. Well, one of the things I know, as you think about the strategies that you set for each one of your companies, and all the different priorities that you're trying to manage, like to the heart of this kind of conversation, one of those I'm sure oftentimes is related to like add-on acquisitions or, buy and build. Like what sort of targets are you typically setting around that? Or is that common to have that as part of your strategy and one of your targets?
Yeah, and it's absolutely critical, Dan. And where I've seen people get sort of sideways with add-on acquisitions or make sort of strategic errors is they don't do enough work up front. They don't have enough rigor in setting the plan. You're sitting here as a CEO, a deal gets banked. Your PE firm gets notified. All of a sudden, there's an inbound request for the management team to sort of evaluate this deal. That's backwards. What I like to do is early on, and it's a pretty rigorous process that I take the team through in the first 6 months to get our strategic plan built. There is an add-on M&A component of that where we have literally ranked our top 25 to 50 targets. And again, that's assuming we have a target-rich space to go after. Oftentimes you're in constrained spaces and have lesser optionality that you need to work with. But once you do that with rigor, then anything that comes in the door, you have a reference point, and you can very rapidly dismiss things that don't make sense. So the management team doesn't spend a lot of time going through cycles to sort of clarify the rationale and try and shut something down. Because the one thing I've learned over time with my private equity sponsors is that they're very deal hungry. They've got a lot of deal DNA, and that's sort of, the lens in which they look at things. But the rigor of that plan is important. And really, when you think about, the rigor of the M&A plan, I'm going to use some boilerplate terms like buy, build, partner analysis. I truly bring that to life because when we have a strategic roadmap, capabilities that we're trying to build, and output of that process is to define the optionality that we want to do, want to bring to bear. And if you're not careful, you can create a lot of complexity. And I'll tell you, the most complexity is created when you essentially acquire two platforms and have to merge them and creatively find a way
Sure.
from point A to point B. And, I've often worked with sponsors that look at that and it's like, oh, that's a near and adjacent market. It's very simple. The doability of that is infinitely more complex, for instance, than doing seamless add-ons that fit your overall sort of platform strategy and story that you want to do. So there's a variety of roles that add-on M&A plays in a strategy, but the highest quality from my perspective is you're actually enhancing, accelerating your solution roadmap, and also developing new sort of modules or solutions that you can pump through your M&A machine or your go-to-market machine and not disrupt the apple cart, keep everybody focused on growth and EBITDA production.
That's interesting, right? I mean, to your point, like you're basically saying like, look, here's how companies get off the rails when it comes to add-on acquisitions. It's if they don't have it as part of their strategy and they're not sure how they're going to address it, and then something comes in opportunistically and you're not sure if should we chase it or not chase it. I don't know. Like we try to make a rationale for it, but like then like you got to start with that at the beginning, right? Is it part of your strategy or not, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So how have you, obviously, like you've worked with a lot of folks that have done private equity deal sourcing, like myself included over the years. Like, what have you seen work well, right, in terms of that relationship?
No, it's a great question, and the relationship flexes depending upon sort of the tier of private equity in which you're operating. And I've had the opportunity to work with larger firms where the sourcing activity is managed in-house. For instance, I've been the head of corporate development in a couple of businesses where we did everything, and sort of the interaction with the sponsor was an approval process, very simplistic approval process, down to sort of mid-market private equity tiers where it's a far more collaborative model between the sponsor and the company, because often these companies are small. They obviously aren't to the stage where they can field the corporate development team. That's a low use of resources, value resources at that stage of the development. And I'll tell you, the best models are where the sponsor partners with the operating team and views this as an enterprise deal pursuit in a very systematic way. The worst scenarios have been where there's a disconnect between the management team and the sponsor views their role as driving the M&A and sort of selectively introducing the leadership team when they feel it's appropriate to do that. And I'll tell you, when you're dealing with, for instance, founders and a lot of tuck-in acquisitions, my experience of the 30 deals that I've taken to conclusion, they've all been sort of founder-led businesses. And it may be unique, but it's generally a byproduct of scale and where we are. And I think sometimes the sponsors have undervalued sort of what the CEO or the operators bring to the table in actually getting the deal to fruition. Because founders, by the way, thank God for founders. They are why we all exist. They're why we're here today. Yeah, I have a tremendous amount of respect, for the businesses that they've created. And it's been an honor of my career to take those businesses and scale them and make them more scalable, over the course of my career. But you sometimes they're not motivated by money. There are a lot of other considerations, or money is one of a subset of considerations in selling the business. They have built a team. Many of them are families. They have built a solution set that they're incredibly proud of, and they want to understand sort of how that's going to fit. They want to understand what their life is going to look like in moving from a founder CEO to potentially reporting to a CEO operator or somebody else. And it's been my experience that really good senior operators are in the best position to tell that story and paint a picture for a founder on what a good home the acquiring business will be. And whereas the sponsors are incredibly tuned to talking about sort of the value, sort of the deal structure, what rolled equity might look like for the sponsor. But if we team effectively together and view it as an enterprise pursuit where we literally come together as a collaborative team, plan the engagements, adjust our roles over time. That's how you chase a big enterprise software deal, when you have to influence many, many people in an organization. Make it a very systematic approach like that. I found a much higher success rate and yield in getting deals across the finish line. The other thing it does, it's very critical that we set the proper expectations with the founder and the members of their team that are involved in the deal on what life's going to look like, so that we can seamlessly move into the integration process and move forward. Because often you have spikes when you go from the deal to sort of living in a new organization, and that can be very disruptive.
There's a really interesting thread there on what's important to founders, specifically in the context of doing an add-on acquisition. Can you say more about that? Like what drive, in your experience and the deals that you've seen, what are those things maybe outside of the price and some of the financials? What are those things that you've seen be more important to founders?
I've seen things, for instance, often it's the solution set and the relationship the founder has with their customers. So think about sort of product perception in the industry. So they're very concerned that the acquiring business is going to somehow, bring harm to what they've created and harm to the relationships that they've built in the industry. So that's an example of where, as the operator, I would bring the process to life on how we're going to protect those relationships, how the founder will play a role, even if it's a transitionary role, to make sure that we've replaced the founder with more traditional customer success relationships, things of that nature, and give them confidence on what that's going to look like. And very importantly, explain the role that their products will fit in the overall sort of platform strategy that we have, or the portfolio strategy that we have. And the best scenario is where it's a true incremental add-on, and we don't have to do a mashup and reconcile solutions and migrate customers. And that's the best setting to reinforce, that sort of life's work or last 10 years work is going to persist and move forward. Probably the second most important thing I've seen is just concern for the teams that they've built, and they operate differently often than private equity businesses, and they're highly sensitive to how we're going to take care of the team, and reinforcing the opportunities that the deal is going to create for them is a very important thing. That we're very fair in how we evaluate people, how we make decisions, and that we demonstrate that in the early days of an acquisition post-close. This is the art that is often missed, and it can often create problems right after you close a deal. And I've seen acquisitions melt down pretty quickly where you have a cultural rift or something, and you lose a critical mass of leadership or people and things of that nature.
Do you have a framework on timing surrounding all of this? Like, who should be responsible for managing relationships with prospects at which point in the process? And saying that, understanding, acknowledging that a larger company backed by maybe a larger private equity firm might have this all take place in-house, but a smaller firm might be more collaborative, as you put it. So do you have a framework on that from kind of the very start when you identify, engage, to pushing things to the finish line?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of this gets back to sort of the strategic plan and identifying sort of a set of prospects that you want to go after, because those are the most fitting or most critical relationships to nurture. And in my lower mid-market roles as CEO, I view part of my job is to constantly be nurturing those relationships. I would never want to have an inbound deal, a deal that's just been banked where I have no connective tissue to the founder. So and that's why the prioritization is so critical. As CEO, you can't do that with 100 prospects, but you can do it with 25 on some cadence and what that looks like. And, in parallel with that, generally, the sponsor sourcing teams are also nurturing a number of those relationships. So from my point of view, what I like to do is when I have that target set of deals defined, I like to meet with the sponsor, make sure we sync up so that we're telling a uniform story to at least sort of what I perceive to be the top 25, prospects, if there are 25. I've been in spaces where there've been 5 or 10, that we could potentially go after. But from day one, I think somebody on the operating team needs to view it as their core role. Generally in the mid-market, lower mid-market space, I believe it to be the CEO role, or you can segment. You might have, 10 high-value targets and another 15 that are of lesser importance, and allocate the responsibility of nurturing that relationship with the other members of your team. And I've done that as well over time. So when you want to actually start a pursuit, or you're reacting to a bank deal, that's when I like to pull the teams together. And by the way, the roles that everybody plays should be contextual. If I get together with my sponsor partner and, a VP on their team, and I pull in my CFO and potentially my head of product, which wears the strategy hat in most of my lower mid-market businesses, we start to put together that team-based approach process to go after the deal. The role I may play versus the sponsor partner may vary depending upon sort of the founder persona, what we perceive to be important. But what's important is that we keep coming together and collaborate as a team, like I said, an enterprise deal pursuit, to make sure that we're adjusting on the fly. And I will tell you, I have a good track record of winning in competitive settings because, and I've been told by, of the 30 deals I've done, 5 of the founders have told me what cinched the deal was how engaged you were as CEO in the process, whereas I was dealing with a corp dev guy in the competition or dealing with a private equity deal maker, and you brought to life what life was going to look like for me after the deal and reinforced how important this was. And so there's some things that only the CEO or only the operating team can do. And by the way, there's some things that only the sponsor team can do as well. And it's important that you just approach it on a team by team basis. But I like to, as soon as I've got the strategy baked, the plan baked, the targets baked, I start that process. Recently, I had, what an interesting thing happened. I got the strategic plan together at Lexipol, presented it to the board, had 25 deal targets on the table, had my top 3, which I thought were most foundational to setting up our platform strategy. And I've never had this happen in my career. Between that moment and the next board meeting, all 3 of them went to market simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we literally had to manage 3 simultaneous pursuits, but that was a stroke of luck. But it also helped get my sponsors engagement and support because they knew we'd already thought about it. We knew we had a good strategic frame of reference and with how the deals were going to fit. And then, it just made it easier to get into the processes and what we're trying to do.
So it sounds like, you've used this term a bunch of times, right? Which is like a collaborative enterprise deal sort of, setup with your partners, right? Like my experience has been for a lot of sponsors, it ends up being, we're going to run add-ons in-house, right? Like we control the deal flow, we do platforms, we do add-ons. Here's a deal. Do you want to do this deal, sort of thing? Or like, we think you need to do this deal and we're going to ram it down your throat, right? Like, hopefully it doesn't, but like I've seen that happen, right?
I've seen it happen too.
And I think the scenario you're advocating for, like, is this, like, who owns that early stuff? Is that still, like, if you were designing the perfect, framework and setup and structure between you and a partner, like, where does it start at the private equity firm? Does it start, there? Does it start together? Who does the initial outreach? Does that matter? And then at what point does it come to you?
Yeah, I think it happens as soon as the plan is put together in my book. Because at that point you have a narrow set of priorities that you want to go after. And from my perspective, as the operator, I or my team, regardless of the sponsor's perspective on who sort of own the process, I will engage. I will have those conversations. I will nurture that relationship because, as you know, Dan, it can take years in some of these things. And you can have 3 or 4 false starts where you come close. I've had one deal where I got to an LOI 3 times over the course of 3 years, and then finally got the deal done. And it's just that the importance of that relationship was key in nurturing that relationship over time. So I view that as the pivotal point. Now, I've had sponsor teams, even though I've sort of narrowed the field to what I think is most strategic, still have a much wider lens in what they're looking at. And they've kicked up deals outside of my focal point, and I've been able to say no several times or not waste a lot of effort on them and keep trying to draw back to that priority scheme that we have. But I think the collaboration starts, in my mind, as soon as you have that sort of high priority target list that you want to go after, because you never know when something's going to come to market, when there's going to be a precipitating event, a compelling need for a founder to sell. So you want to be in the game, nurturing the relationship, from as soon as you do that. In the case here at Lexipol, this is an example. I did the same thing at Real Green and other business I've been part of. As soon as I got that 25 target set defined, I literally within a month met with every one of them. I made it a priority, systematically kicking off the process, because I also needed to get as much intelligence. Not only is it I'm the new CEO, I'm building the relationship, but it's also trying to gauge sort of where they are in process, gather more information, refine our prioritization. And then, for many of them, I'm on a 6-month cadence, and for some, I'm on a quarterly cadence, and some I'm chasing continuously. That looks like
it sounds like, in general, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like in general you're advocating for like the best way to manage add-on acquisitions is to have them managed at the portfolio company.
Yeah. And so to clarify, my perspective is I like to view my sponsor as the corp dev team that I don't have. And we have to go through an approval process in phases, to get to an LOI and move forward. But I like to take that view. Several of my sponsors probably haven't viewed themselves that way in the nature of the relationship, but that's sort of my approach and how I've driven it before.
Do you think that all CEOs or the majority of CEOs think about it the way that, like, that are operators think about it the way that you do?
I don't. You'll find a wide range of sort of experiences in operators, in philosophies. Many do, and Dan, many do. But sort of my methodology, how I've crafted, has been driven out of sort of truly being the head of corp dev and doing a pile of transactions and just constantly trying to hone the approach. And we know that, add-on M&A can be a very compelling way to accelerate your plans and create value. It's sort of part of every playbook now, increasingly so as we look at it. So I just like to get in front of it and make sure that we're really, it gets back to that theme of focusing on my team's energy on the things that are going to drive the biggest bang for the buck.
So Bill, like you've mentioned how important it is to have these, strong relationships that you're building and cultivating as the CEO with these, other competitors or folks in the market or whatever. Like what's like, from your perspective, what's the value of building those relationships for you? Like, why are you doing that directly?
It's very important that sort of the founders or the seller of businesses have connection with the senior leader in the organization. And that's been a differentiator, compared with how other companies, larger businesses with a corp dev team or engage. But that relationship pays dividends in a number of ways. First, as you go through a deal process, there are ups and downs. You may have to react to something you find in diligence that may require a change in deal terms. And I find that the deeper the relationship that you have, it's sort of a buffer and it helps you get through some of those tough moments to get deals done. Equally important, or perhaps more important, is to set proper expectations around what life will look like once the transaction's complete, so that you can seamlessly go from a deal mindset into integration plan execution and operating very seamlessly. And by having the relationship, being able to talk through what life is going to look like, post deal, literally bringing that to life to a founder or senior members of their team, it prevents shocks. It helps get them aligned because you need them to reinforce the change that the entire team's going to go through. And if you got to have the leaders on board, in the company being acquired to facilitate that change. So I think it pays dividends to allow us to get more deals done through the process, and equally important, shortens the cycle and reduces the risk and actually being able to realize the potential of the deals that when they're done.
I'm going to go back to one thing you've mentioned a handful of times. You've said, I kind of have this list of 25 company, like whatever it is, right? Like however many companies that are your like prioritized target set, right? For for the platform you're working on. How do you think about building that list, and maybe even particularly to click into that even further? Like, do you have a framework that you think of for prioritizing targets? Like what's a good framework look like in terms of, like, out of all the companies in the universe, right? Like, how do I figure out the ones that I should focus on? Like how do you go about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is born out of the high level strategy. What business are you trying to build? And I'll give you an example at Lexipol. Amazing company, a truly compelling mission, but a portfolio of sort of independent solutions that did not have a platform story or bent, that hadn't been brought together in a very thoughtful way. So one of the first things I always try to do, because inevitably you were building businesses with multiple products. Seldom, do we have a one trick pony that's going to sort of get us from point A to point B? They do exist, but it's rare. So once you have that platform story, then you start to think about the building blocks of that platform strategy, and for Lexipol, it was rounding out our training solutions so that we could develop COPS, for instance, over their full life cycle. And we only had a piece of that. So we have a life cycle sort of training element to our platform story. We also have a performance management element of our story, where we need to be able to ingest data, identify a training need so that we can more proactively serve up training real time to develop, a COP, or, reinforce positive behaviors, or train against deficiencies. So once we had sort of that platform in place that essentially operates under the rally cry of making performance excellence the heartbeat of public safety, that's sort of the motivating theme for the team. We had gaps. So, and then we define sort of the pieces and parts that we need to fill out the training solution, the pieces and parts we need to collect data, and how we can build out that data strategy over time. And then we have a choice. Can we build it? Or are there, prospective acquisition targets that we can go out and find? And that is literally the process that I work through with every business to get to a prioritized list of what we need to build. And it just so happened in the case of Lexipol, that did yield, about 25 prospective targets, that are out there that we can go after. And sometimes if you don't have a quote unquote target rich environment, you got to build stuff, and it takes time to build solutions. There's a practical time constraint and how fast you can bring things to market, get them ramped, deliver revenue. That's what makes M&A so appealing in a private equity context. You can literally instantly get something you can sell immediately, start creating value, but then focus on the integration use cases. But it has to fit. And I like having the big picture, understanding the puzzle pieces, and then translating that into a prioritized approach plan that we can go after.
Talking about that big picture for a minute, you mentioned, because it sounds like you're saying, okay, build a platform story, and then use that to inform, your strategy, which includes add-on acquisitions. Like what does a good platform story look like?
Well, a good platform story is something that creates uniqueness for the business. So you're creating differentiation. There's a lot of art involved in this, Dan. But when I look at sort of Lexipol as an example, we have such a strong market position. We had certain building blocks. It was natural to think about a story and how we bring them together and fill in the gaps. And when you look at that, when you think about our platform story, I view this as a strategy and a vision that will carry us for the next, 10 to 20 years. Companies have to constantly reinvent themselves, but it defines a space that we can own or have a very strong market position. And I told you, I don't think about ownership because in driving value, but it does have a real sort of impact on valuation for businesses. So that's part of the art and bringing that to stairs. So, is it a compelling story? Does it create a market ownership position or high differentiation? Is it executable? Can you pull the pieces and parts to get to sort of a critical mass of capabilities or an MVP of the platform story, minimally viable, version of the platform story? Then it all ties together and it fits. And that's sort of my guiding principle on how I think about things.
So if you were given, is a platform story something you can give in one sentence? Or like what's Lexipol's platform story today?
Our Lexipol story is that we are building the global performance management platform for public safety.
It's kind of like what are we doing and like what value were we providing to the world?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And when we talk to a chief, this is very important to me. We're talking about sort of making performance excellence the heartbeat of public safety. So it's all about sort of lifting the performance, supporting their teams. We have a huge recruiting problem in public safety right now. When I was younger, it was a career that was highly sought after, and now it's been challenging to staff these agencies and sheriff's offices. It's a real problem. So we want to build a better work environment, provide better development opportunities, provide better wellness solutions so they feel supported at work. And that all fits in the theme of driving performance excellence.
Super helpful. I love it. The global mission.
Global mission, yeah. But turning it into something that you can literally build to get to that MVP, and then you can see how you build it over years, and having a differentiated position, you start to think about the story you're going to put in the sim, 4 years down the road.
Bill, we've reached the advice portion of the conversation here. So obviously our angle is how this all kind of applies to the folks that are out there looking for those opportunities, platforms at add-ons at private equity firms. And so the questions are going to be surrounding that. My takeaway from the first 3/4 or 2/3 of this conversation is, advice would be to hire Bill as your CEO of your portfolio company, and that will kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting. But if you think about advice for folks that are in deal sourcing roles today, what would you suggest? How should they go about it?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, if in the scheme of add-ons, partner with your operating teams and clarify prioritization and gear your efforts alongside them in accordance with that prioritization scheme. If you think about it in a more general sense, Matt, say sourcing a new platform investment, I would encourage them to seek differentiation in their outreach. Even though we are a sponsor-backed business, a lot of people don't do the research, figure that out. I probably have, 10 to 20 inbound emails a week. But I will tell you, if they apply the principles, the best practices that we bring to bear in demand generation marketing in our portfolio companies, if they bring that stuff to bear, it'll be game-changing for them. And I occasionally, when I get an outreach from a deal sourcer at a preeminent firm, a Vista, Thoma Bravo, or somebody, and they're falling flat and they haven't hooked me, they haven't said anything compelling, they haven't researched me, they have no personal connection to me, or even, contextual understanding of the business that I'm running. Sometimes I'll coach them. I do that probably once a quarter just to help somebody out in the industry. I'll write back to them. I said, normally I wouldn't respond to your email, but I looked at your background. Let's spend a few minutes together and let me give you some feedback on how to elicit a response, in your sourcing activities. So we do, but a lot of that's it's discovery. It's putting the effort in to focus on fewer high quality opportunities than mass marketing in what you're doing.
I'm curious how that influences like what you've seen over time. Since you've been involved with a number of PE-backed companies, have you seen any sort of change over time when it comes to the deal sourcing in PE and kind of the initial outreach?
Yeah. To be honest with you, what surprises me, I haven't. What I have seen is an increase in volume, and, starting with the top tier firms moving down, you can see, by the way, I learn of a new firm every single day, whether I'm being approached around a board seat or a reference for a CEO. It's fascinating to me how the model has proliferated. There once was a day where you could carve off a new space as a PE firm, and that provided certain advantages, but the competitive intensity is so high. So now the volume of sort of sourcing requests to me has gone up, but I haven't seen an uptick in the quality, which surprises me, quite frankly, because many of these companies own software businesses or other companies that are exceptional at marketing and driving conversion rates.
And obviously the volume has increased, and we're seeing that, right? I mean, like Matt and I are both talking to firms every day about how they're like, we want to adopt deal sourcing. We want to grow our deal sourcing team. We're trying to figure out best practices for deal sourcing. So that all makes sense. But I imagine like have there been any good ones in there, or like what has been like the best outreach that you've received? Do you have an example of like something somebody's done right when they've been reaching out to you?
Yeah, I mean, there are. And by the way, it's just a small handful where there was enough discovery and sort of adaptation of the message that it caught my eye and it triggered a response and a callback. And we all have egos and we all want to be recognized, but when somebody has done the research and understands that I started my life as a lobsterman and then starts talking about sort of their love of the state of Maine, which I'm very passionate about, has nothing to do with the deal, but they got a call back, a prospective deal. And then occasionally there have been some that demonstrated an insight or two that I didn't understand, or signaled that they could bring some resources to the table that would be worth me listening to. They've done some industry research or something like that, but shockingly, that's in the minority. It's in the minority from my perspective.
So it sounds like you'd recommend if I'm sitting out there trying to figure out the right way to tactically engage a CEO, I might consider things like, how can I establish a personal connection with them, or what's some unique insight I can provide, or how can I show up at the table with some value? Is that the right set of things?
That's like the basics, Dan, but there's a whole higher level game. Surprisingly, I've never had a sourcer work my network to reach me, and again, I'm not a founder, so you have to take sort of my experience with a grain of salt. I think very attractive, earlier stage businesses are probably have an order of magnitude more activity than I see, running, sponsor backed businesses today. But that's an incredibly powerful thing a tactic that we deploy in enterprise sales and what we do. Work the network. Find someone credible to make a recommendation that you should have a conversation with this firm, and reinforcing the value proposition for that. And then the good old fashioned approach, conveniently being in town and showing up on the doorstep to bang on the door. That's what it takes, and I know some firms do this. I just think those are more compelling engagements than the 10 to 20 emails a week I get from.
I tell folks that was my first recommendation when I joined Sarant. I sat down with the partners and I said, guys, we got to happen to be places more often.
Yep. It's powerful. If I would tend, I'll be honest with you, as a CEO, if you showed up and you were backing a reputable firm, I would tend to carve out 15 minutes to have a chat with you. That's totally different than responding to an email.
Well, thinking about, your full breadth of private equity experience, understanding it's kind of evolved over time. If you had to sum up private equity in one word, what would that one word be?
Pervasive. Pervasive. And because I've watched, over the course of my career, when I started working, I guess 35 years ago, the model was just sort of being developed. I mean, I've worked with firms like GTCR, who's been sort of an inventor of the model, Kohlberg and Company, inventor of the model, and evolved over time. Great experiences in understanding the history there, but it just wasn't sort of everywhere and pervasive. And I think the reason we have to want to recognize that it's pervasive is everybody I mentor, everybody I develop, you will be working in private equity backed businesses. So you've got to make it a science and a study to understand how to be successful in these environments. And it is different than sort of a founder led business or different than a publicly traded business. I know I've been in those environments too. The rigor, the discipline that we bring to bear is the magic of the model in what we do. So study it, become an expert at it, make yourself a top tier practitioner. Because if you don't, you won't find a job because 95% of the companies are going to be PE backed. I know that's an exaggeration, but so
it feels like these days, right? It's like, take a look to your left, take a look to your right. Both of those companies are going to be private equity backed.
Yeah.
This has been an awesome conversation, Bill. Really enjoyed it. Kind of looking forward, like, do you ever see yourself directly in a private equity firm as a partner, or you can other executive chair roles? What are the next steps? What's the future look like for Bill Noonan?
Yeah, look, Dan, if I could go back and live my life over, I probably would have tried to become a private equity deal guy and sort of make that a career trajectory. I have no regrets. I love what I do. I'm an operator and I'll always be an operator. I have no ambition to be sort of a partner in a PE firm. Even I'll tell you the role that I do enjoy the most. I do love coaching people. So I can see myself as I sort of transition, through the remaining years of my career, probably focused more on executive chair roles where I have an opportunity to share my experience, be a sounding board and coaching less experienced CEOs, just helping them succeed and develop, and sometimes those relationships can be really magical when you have the right sort of chemistry, and sometimes they can. And that's one of the things I try to test before I ever step into one of those roles to make sure we've got great chemistry with the team. But no, I'm gonna be an operator or in some way, shape, or form for the rest of my life.
Bill, what would you say if I asked? What would you say is your greatest strength? Where do you see yourself adding the most value?
Building powerful teams. That trumps everything. There are a lot of great leaders out there, people that build, foundational teams. I take an incredible interest in my leaders and want to see them all win and succeed and develop them. And that's sort of my secret sauce and my approach is just the time I invest to try and coach them and make them successful. And every operating sort of experience is a living laboratory, a chance for people to learn, hopefully make some mistakes, not catastrophic mistakes, but just an opportunity to learn and develop. And I put a lot of work into developing the team. But I'm not afraid to make the tough calls because you have to be able to make tough calls and make sure you have the right team based on the complexity and the task ahead. So I think it's that combination. That's the most important thing to be successful at what we do.
You've mentioned how important culture is to you, right? And you were talking about that primarily, I think, in the context of the teams that you build and the CEOs that you might mentor. But what do you look for in the way of private equity partners that you work with? Like, are there common characteristics of the folks that you end up working with?
Yeah, there are. I'd say at this point, Dan, I probably worked with 25 partners, in various PE firms, because typically you have one or two sort of at the table in terms of the deals, and sometimes they transition roles in deals. So it's been interesting to see the different personalities. I gravitate to folks that exude a high level of confidence and trust in their operators, where I feel like the operators are a very important piece of what they're trying to do, rather than human capital, to achieve a goal and objective, just being brutally honest with you. And I found several that sort of I engage with that way, and I feel like they're true partner in creating value. There are things that they do that I can't do. There are things that I do that they can't do, but it's the respect, across the aisle in terms of what we each bring to the table that's so important to me. And enjoy working with partners that, when I say I need help, they can help provide the support, but equally important, when I say I don't need help, they don't force it upon us, which is common in many models. But yeah, I think just showing up with sort of the acknowledgement that we all have tough jobs, incredibly difficult, demanding jobs, but that respect and support. And where you really see it is when something goes bad, something really bad happens that you got to work through. That's where people's true colors show. And whether you have a great partner or a less great partner in which you want to work with. So, and I've been fortunate. I've had a lot of great partners through this journey.
Any final words of wisdom for maybe the collective set of private equity folks and operators, and because that's that intersection that we've been talking a lot about today. Like, any final words of wisdom from people on either side of that aisle in that equation?
I think just the final words, building on my last thought, is it takes both of us to be successful. And to the extent that we can continue to refine how we collaborate, and just constantly get better and better, we're going to have, even more success together in driving great outcomes for businesses. But culture is a very important piece of it.
This has been an awesome conversation. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat through how to do operations, how to do add-on acquisitions, how to partner together private equity firms to have success. Like, this has been great, man. Really appreciate the time.